Chapter 2 Sentence of Death. Humanity is an industrious species. In the early years of the first great breakout, humans came to the Uva Beta Uva system, a complex of 14 planets that sits near the center of the Milky Way. The explorers discovered that the fifth planet was capable of supporting human life, and after a few years of tinkering with its polar caps to improve the temperature, settlers started to arrive. They brought with them idealistic visions of escape from life on Earth, which was becoming grubbier and crowded. The planet was green and pleasant, and for a few years, they lived there undisturbed. Their only major dispute was over what to call their beautiful new world. Uva Beta Uva 5 was not only long and clumsy, it lacked poetry and vision, something of the pioneering spirit. Such a title reeked of bureaucracy and red tape. The old way. The Council of Settlers plumped eventually, with a pitiful lack of originality, for New Earth. At the same time, they declared their independence. Not long after, an agent from one of the big mining companies came for a sniff at Uva Beta Uva 5. He was sent away with a bloody nose by the citizens of New Earth, who were happy to sacrifice their principles when it suited them. Rather than return home empty-handed, the agent took a quick look at a couple of the other inhospitable planets, just to be sure. So it was discovered that Uva Beta Uva 3 was a solid giant composed almost entirely of belzite, then fourth in the league of precious non-terrestrial minerals posted by Earth government. This being the case, the settlers of New Earth suddenly found all their legal rights rescinded under a little-known subclause of the Intergalactic Mineral Exploitation Act of 2217. The mining companies blundered in, and the Uva Beta Uva system became the center of a rush unparalleled in cosmic history. 150 years later, things were very different. The belzite was long gone. The third planet ripped apart. Almost all the other worlds in the system had been drained of whatever wealth they possessed. Planet 5, as it came to be known, remained populous and industrialized, but money was running out. Tourism and service industries boomed as the colonists attempted to glamorize their past with tales of ore pirates and ghost bases. Then came the galactic recession, crippling the central markets on Earth and sending waves of financial discontent through the optic beams the lengths of its influence. Somewhere between the erratic, spooling orbit of Planet 2 and the graceful arc of the gutted Planet 3, an object was moving. It plowed through space on a direct course, but it was not a spacecraft. An asteroid 2 miles wide. It had been plucked from its natural home and converted to a specific purpose. It was propelled by gigantic rocket ports, bolted to its rear. A magnificent building sprawled over the asteroid. Had it been built on a planet, it might have been taken for the residence of an eccentric billionaire with a fascination for the Gothic. Its stacked stories and array of turrets and towers appeared to be made of stone, but were not. Light poured from windows in the vaulted halls and high-ceilinged chambers that led away from the central block, and through them a mass of people could be seen rushing about inside. Barristers and their clerks, solicitors, law students, ushers, administrative workers, psychologists, wardens, security operatives, criminals. Each had a place somewhere along the 9 miles of coiled corridor. Other features included a concealed docking port, unused since the construction of the building, and a laser cannon, ceremonially ornamented and still primed for the unlikely event of an attack. An aerial world on top of the central tower, providing a constant link to the civilization that had deemed it necessary to build such a place as the Rock of Judgement. All in Courtroom 1 stood as the door to the debating chambers opened with a theatrical creak, and High Archon Pierpoint returned to pronounce judgment. The defendant, a thin, sharp-featured man in his early 30s, dressed in gray coveralls, got to his feet. His knuckles whitened as he gripped the handrail of the dock. 2 burly security officers in full dress uniform, red frock coats with black edging and gleaming gold buttons, stood on either side of him. Only feet away, High Archon Pierpoint cleared his throat and settled into the red leather upholstery of his chair.
"You may be seated,"
he mumbled. Everyone, apart from the defendant and his guards, sat. Pierpoint's lined face was expressionless, but his stare was penetrating and swept the large room. Seated on the bench below him were counsels for the defense and prosecution. They wore the fleecy wigs and black gowns that had symbolized their profession for centuries. Beneath them were court officials and a stenographer typing the details of the hearing onto a small terminal. The recess had lasted 3 hours, and the tension in the courtroom was reflected in the absolute silence observed by its occupants. Motes of dust drifted down slowly through square shafts of light cast by artificial skylights mounted in the high-vaulted ceilings. After 4 days of debate, counter-debate, and wrangle, the truth had been decided.
"The state of Uva Beta Uva 5 versus Jarrigan Volt,"
Pierpoint began, reading from a prepared statement scrolling up on a screen before him. His sonorous tones echoed dramatically around the courtroom.
"I have accepted the evidence submitted by counsels for the defense and prosecution. I have studied the computer records supplied by prosecuting counsel for the night of November 3rd last. They indicate clearly that the accused, Volt, entered the premises in question."
He consulted his notes.
503 Winter Street, Coppertown, and there, in a state of intoxication, raised his vibro-knife and murdered the unfortunate Victor Scott.
Volt's face flushed.
"No!" he shouted. "Them records were fakes! I never went nowhere near Stott that night!"
One of the security men laid a restraining hand on his shoulder. The High Archon ignored the interruption.
"I do not accept the defense's contention that the security records for Stott's premises were inadmissible under Section 5, Para 2A of the Computers and Cybernetic Systems Act of 2265.
He sent a withering look down at the defense counsel.
"I would refer counsel for the defense to the case of the State versus K. Archibald, 23 and 5, on the matter of admissibility of privately registered information."
Defense counsel nodded.
"Furthermore, 3 witnesses of good character testified to separate sightings of the accused in the area of Stott's premises not 10 minutes afterwards. I have therefore concluded that the charge leveled against the accused, Jarrigan Volt, is tested and true, and I find him guilty on both counts of forced entry and murder."
Volt leapt forward.
"This is a frame-up!"
he screamed, as the guards twisted his arms behind his back.
"They've done me in good and proper!"
High Archon Pierpoint looked down at him.
"Does the accused wish me to add a charge of contempt to the indictment?"
Volt stopped struggling. He sneered.
"What does it matter? You're going to have me frazzled anyway. Frazzled to a cinder!"
The High Archon maintained his level gaze.
"I have yet to pronounce sentence."
He glanced down at some papers on the desk before him.
"Volt, you were given the opportunity to rebuild your life and your position in society following several lengthy periods in prison. Your talents as a mineralogist made you a valuable asset to the company that chose to employ you, but you betrayed the trust they had placed in you and became involved in what can only be described as a drunken brawl. Such behavior cannot be excused."
He gestured to an aide, who stepped forward and placed a square of black fabric over his wig.
"Jarrigan Volt, you will be taken from this place to an area of close confinement. From there you will be led in due course to a justice chamber, where your particles will be reversed until they have dispersed into the atmosphere. May the Lord have mercy upon your soul."
"I never did it!"
Volt screamed as he was led from the dock.
"I never killed Stott! It's a frame-up!"
The square of black fabric was removed from the head of Pierpoint, and he stood and left the courtroom for his chambers. The counsels for prosecution and defense shook hands and started to gather their papers together. It had been a long Thursday. The cells beneath the courtrooms were metal-walled and brightly lit. Each of the barred spaces contained a human occupant, caged by an electronic lock. Death Corridor, as it had become known, looked exactly the same as the others in the detention area, but the prisoners were quieter and their wardens friendlier. At the end of the row of condemned men and women stood a shelf that overflowed with religious and philosophical texts. The door next to it led to a dark tunnel, at the end of which lay the justice chamber and the particle reversal apparatus. Something peculiar was happening in one of the condemned cells. An elderly lady, dressed in vivid green, sat still on a stool. An easel and canvas had been erected before her. An extraordinary figure was dabbing at the canvas with a brush that he replenished regularly with paints from the palette held in his left hand. His name was Stokes. He was 43, completely bald, and his hulking frame was covered by a long black coat. He wore a cravat and a dark blue beret. His shiny head and fussy hand movements gave him the aspect of an agitated egg. At the moment, he was enjoying himself rather more than usual.
"Splendid! Splendid!" he told his model. "You sit so well, my dear."
He gave the canvas a broad, upward stroke of the mossy green, and his thin, bloodless lips curled into a smile. The elderly lady remained inert as she spoke through a tiny gap in her lips.
"Oh, it's nothing. Gerald had me sit for portraits 12 times. All of them turned out a fright, of course."
"Gerald?" Stokes pondered a moment. "Now, which one was he? Number 3, wasn't it? The little something extra in the sandwiches?"
The elderly lady shook her head slightly.
"No, dear, no. Gerald was number 5. I pushed him off that high-speed train. You're thinking of young Arthur."
She smiled wistfully.
"A sweet boy, Arthur. I almost felt guilty on that occasion. Fussy little thing, though. Wouldn't eat his crusts. And if I left them on, he'd leave them behind or tip them away."
Her eyes lit up.
"Do you know, I think that must have been how I got the idea."
Stokes chuckled.
"You wicked creature! But I'm sure it was Gerald who was sandwiches."
She shrugged.
"You may well be right. My memory isn't what it was. I even got myself confused at the trial."
She settled herself back into the position.
"Now, Mr. Stokes, tell me, how's it coming along? I'm so looking forward to the end result."
Before he could answer, the electronic lock of the cell bleeped. The bars were slid back, and 2 officers stepped in. They were dressed in full ceremonial uniform. The first was a middle-aged woman whose features were stern and unpleasant. Stokes recognized her immediately. Margo, chief of security. She always made him feel uneasy, as if she was about to arrest him.
"Mrs. Naomi Blakemore,"
she said,
"it is time for you to face judgment."
The elderly woman's face crumpled with disappointment, and she turned to Stokes.
"Oh, surely not already,"
she protested.
"Mr. Stokes hasn't had time to complete his portrait."
The artist put aside his tools and wrung his hands.
"Another hour is all I need. Please, Margo."
The woman was clearly irritated.
"You should know procedure by now,"
she told Stokes.
"Termination has been scheduled and cannot be delayed."
Naomi Blakemore tutted.
"How uncivilized. Typical of you young people nowadays. It's rush, rush, rush."
She slipped from her stool, brushed the creases from her dress, and, to his surprise, took the male warden's arm.
"What a lovely moustache you have, dear," she told him. "My 4th husband had one just like it. Bristly Kissy, I used to call him. Or was it the 5th?
She struggled again and held out a hand to Stokes.
"So nice to have met you."
He took and kissed it.
"The pleasure is mine alone. Taste and refinement are qualities I am not accustomed to finding in these parts."
She winked.
"Goodbye, then."
With a giggle and a nervous wave, she and her escort were gone in the direction of the justice chamber. Stokes started to pack away his things.
"I suppose,"
he murmured as he covered the canvas,
"I can complete it later from memory."
He shook his head and sighed.
"Still, it will lack the essential verisimilitude."
Another warden passed the cell and tapped on the bars.
"Hurry up in there, Mr. Stokes," he said, "or I might mistake you for one of your subjects and lock you in."
Stokes gave him a playful punch on the shoulder with one of his pale, long-fingered hands.
"Oh, you!"
As he left his cell, carrying the canvas under one arm and his paints in a box under the other. Shouts came from the far end of the corridor and the door that led to the courtrooms above. Stokes watched as a burly man in gray coveralls was brought into view.
"It's a fit-up!" he was shouting. "It's a conspiracy! They've got it in for me!"
The wardens broke open a cell, bundled the man inside, and slammed the bars closed again.
"I want to see my lawyer!"
the man screamed defiantly.
"Get him! I want to see him! It's a fit-up!"
Stokes rolled his eyes heavenward. He hated the drab ones.
"Oh, how tedious," he said.
"Still," he told himself as he strode over to the new arrival,
"duty beckons ever on."
He stood before the man and bowed before the cell.
"My friend," he said, "Menlove Stokes."
The man, identified by a collar around his neck as Jerrigan Volt, looked him up and down.
"Who the dark mind might you be?" "I imagined I had made that perfectly clear," Stokes said. "I have come to offer you my services as an artist."
"Oh yeah?"
"Quite so," Stokes went on. "For no charge, I offer you, as I offer every wretched soul that finds its way to this, the darkest of all destinations, the opportunity to endure forever in my work."
He flung his laden arms as wide as he could, and his eyes bulged with enthusiasm.
"Name your choice of materials. Chalks, clay."
He looked down sadly at the covered canvas.
"Oils? I am an expert in the use of these and many others."
His voice dropped to a whisper.
"Your essence will endure long after your physical envelope has been snuffed from our miserable sphere."
Volt shook his head in disbelief.
"You sick maniac!" he snarled. "Get away from me!"
He shouted up the corridor at the warden.
"Get this scumball away from me and get me my lawyer!"
Stokes backed away. He knew when he was not wanted, and the fellow would have been difficult to get an accurate likeness of. His features were lumpy, undistinguished, and charmless. He waited for the lift at the end of the corridor and tried to ignore the deluded ramblings of Volt.
"It's a fit-up, I tell ya! Someone's got it in for me! Calls himself the Sentinel! He wants me out of the way! I want to talk to my lawyer! Get him!"
The lift arrived and Stokes climbed in. The doors closed, and Volt's shouts were cut off.
"Thank heaven for that," Stokes said to himself. "The effrontery!"
He found himself longing for some novelty in his life, some really splendid crime, deviously and expertly hatched by a clutch of cunning masterminds. But there was little chance of that. After all, the really impressive criminals were the ones who didn't get themselves caught. The time-space vortex is an area of existence that no two academics can agree upon. Much doubt remains as to whether it is an area at all, or indeed, if it can be said to exist. What laws govern the lives of the creatures that inhabit it? Is it distinct from or parallel to dimensions such as hyperspace, or phenomena such as black holes? Is it best to visualize it as a corridor, an impossibly twisted strip, or an infinite ceiling? While the debate rages on throughout the universe, the academics and their publishers will be happy. Somewhere in the time-space vortex span a time-space machine that had got stuck in the disguise of a blue police box. This was the TARDIS. Aboard the TARDIS, which was bigger inside than out, a game of Monopoly was in progress, and the Doctor was losing. He was sitting next to the board in his shirt sleeves, facing Romana and K9 and shaking the dice. His counter, the ship, was trapped in jail again, powerless to impede his opponent's steady accumulation of cash and property. A combination of personal pride and lack of funds prevented him from buying his way out. He blew into the tumbler for luck.
"Right," he said. "Now, listen, Romana. According to all the laws of probability, this throw has to be a double."
He threw the dice. They landed with 1 and 2 spots facing upward.
Improbable,"
Romana observed. The Doctor looked crestfallen, but before he could comment, K9 piped up.
"Dice, mistress."
The task of shaking for K9, whose lack of arms prevented him from taking on a more physical role in the game, had fallen to Romana. She shook the tumbler and rolled a double 6. The Doctor shook his curly head.
"I don't believe it."
"Counter, master. Dog."
K9 prompted him.
I know, K9, keep your sensors on, the doctor said churlishly.
He reached for K9's counter and moved it around the board.
Ha!
He said gleefully as it completed its journey.
The waterworks. As I own both utilities, that'll be £120, please.
K9's ear sensors swiveled.
Correction, Master. 12 moves places dog counter on community chest square.
Does it? The doctor said, innocently. Romana studied the board. K9's right, Doctor. He shrugged and moved the counter on a square.
Oh, yes. Well, all these distractions, pressures.
He waved his arm airily.
Great green ambassadors almost flattening me in their enthusiasm. I can't be expected to get everything right.
Romana smiled. No, of course not, Doctor. She reached for a card from the community chest. Congratulations, K9. You have won second prize in a beauty contest. Collect £10. She allocated a note to his mounting pile.
Congratulations appreciated, mistress.
Romana rolled 7 and moved her counter, the top hat, on. Ah, Northumberland Avenue.
Ah,
crowed the doctor, pleased to be reminded of one of his earlier successes.
Which I own.
Romana reached for some money. But which I am going to buy. The doctor looked scandalized.
You can't do that!
Why can't I? You're in jail and I have the funds.
K9, tell her she can't do that!
The robot dog clicked and whirred.
Negative, Master. The mistress is proceeding according to the rules you established earlier.
Romana handed him the dice and tumbler. A bad loser, eh, Doctor?
Loser?
Well, you've been in jail for most of the game. The doctor cleared his throat.
Listen, Romana, when you've been locked up as often as I have, perhaps you'll learn not to...
Fortunately for Romana, he was interrupted by an unearthly trumpeting noise from the central console. The center column, upon which the doctor's hat was presently resting, wheezed to a halt. The randomizer, linked up to the TARDIS navigation controls by the doctor in an effort to safeguard his location from the vengeful Black Guardian, had activated. They had materialized. Glad of the diversion, Romana sprang up and made for the console. I'll take a look at the scanner, shall I? The doctor seemed barely to have noticed the change in their circumstances.
Hold on. One thing at a time. We're in the middle of a game, in case you hadn't noticed.
It'd be safer to check. He looked up at her.
You know your trouble, Romana.
Not yet. She studied the console readouts. The TARDIS's base was firm, and there was no traces of harmful substances in an atmosphere that was almost sterile.
Your trouble is that you can't keep your mind on one thing at a time. Your mental processes are all over the place.
Are they? She turned the scanner control. The shutters parted to show what appeared to be nothing more nor less than a small cave. The beacon on the roof of the TARDIS swept about, casting blue light over a wall of rock. She surmised. A cave. Doesn't look very promising. She closed the shutters. The doctor huffed and turned away.
Really, K9? I suppose you'll just have to play for her.
Master.
Romana unhooked a gray woolen jacket from the hat stand and shrugged herself into it. She was wearing a white cloth shirt, a bootlace tie, knickerbockers, and black boots. An outfit dredged from a remote recess of the TARDIS's enormous wardrobe room. She looked rather like a Victorian street urchin. I'm going to take a look outside. The doctor did not reply. Romana shrugged, popped a cap on her head, and pulled the big red lever on the console. The double doors swung open with a soft hum. She walked through, and they closed automatically behind her. Romana emerged into the cave, which was as unremarkable as the scanner had suggested. She dug into the pocket of her jacket and produced the doctor's yo-yo. She flicked it up and down and frowned. Definitely a simulated gravity field. She exchanged the yo-yo for a small torch and looked about. About 20 feet ahead, the cave ended suddenly in a metal wall. She walked up to the wall and rapped on it. There was no trace of a hidden opening mechanism, and she'd left her sonic screwdriver in another coat. She looked back at the TARDIS. I suppose I'll just have to wait then. The game was progressing. The doctor's ship was still in jail, and K9's turn had ended in the acquisition of both Whitechapel Road and King's Cross Station.
That girl's got no sense of priority, the doctor mumbled, rushing from one thing to another.
He rolled the tumbler for Romana, and a total of 9 appeared. K9 twittered.
Hat, Master. Mistress Romana acquires Fleet Street and places a hotel.
The doctor shook his head in amazement.
How can she be winning? She's not even here!
He got to his feet and checked a few instruments idly. "I suppose I'd better get after her," he said. "She's probably already got herself into a mess and needs rescuing."
Negative, Master.
Said K9.
Prognosis based on my observation of previous incidents indicates that you are 2.495 times more likely than the mistress to need assistance upon leaving the TARDIS.
"Oh, shut up, K9." The doctor jammed his hat on his head, put on his long, oatmeal-colored coat, and wound his trailing scarf around his shoulders. "When I want your opinion, I'll ask for it." He operated the door, and the metal dog trundled forward eagerly. "Stay, K9," he ordered. "I want you on guard." K9's tail sensor drooped.
Affirmative, Master.
The doctor nodded and left the TARDIS. A second later, there was an alarming crash and a muffled cry. K9 moved forward to investigate. The doctor reappeared, dusting himself down. He wagged an accusing finger at his computer pet. "I don't want to hear you say I told you so, K9," he said and stalked out. The doors closed behind him. K9's sensors chirped.
Instruction noted, Master. This unit will never say, I told you so. Linguistic sequence erased from phraseology bank.
The doctor joined Romana in the dark cave. He licked a finger, ran it along a wall, and sniffed at the deposits it's collected. Carbonaceous asteroid, I'd say. Traces of refractories, accelerated decay of aluminium-26, etc. Romana nodded her agreement and produced the yo-yo. She executed an elaborate double loop. "And we're on the fringe of a simulated gravity field. I'd say they're using remote gravitic excitation." The doctor frowned. "Would you?" He snatched the yo-yo and returned it to his pocket. Romana crossed over to the metal panel in the wall and rapped on it with her knuckles. "This must be the outer wall of their living space. It's Euralinium, so this is possibly an Earth colony." The doctor was dubious. "On an asteroid? I think even the human race would have more sense than that." He started to tap the wall. "It's all right, Doctor. I've already tried that." He stopped tapping the tunnel and turned to face her. "I think I'd better come out first next time, yes?" "If you say so." He ferreted in his pocket and pulled out the sonic screwdriver. A couple of adjustments converted it into a powerful cutting tool. The sonic beam started to cut a sparking line through the metal. Pierpoint sat behind his desk in the spacious, oak-paneled office of his chambers. Spread before him were a variety of reports and papers awaiting his attention. A small desk lamp illuminated the pinched features of his heavily lined face. He was a tall, distinguished-looking man in his late 50s. Now out of his wig and gown, he wore a glistening gold blouson with elaborately puffed sleeves beneath a dark brown tabard. A skull cap of golden beads had been woven into his uplifted peroxide blonde hair. As was the custom for the senior echelon of society at this point in history, his high cheekbones were dabbed with a hint of red cosmetic. The office reflected his personality. The drinks cabinet, leather-buttoned chairs, and green carpet were all spotlessly clean. A tall grandfather clock ticked noisily in a corner. Volumes of law were ranged against a far wall. The only other ornamentation was a bronze figure beneath a glass dome, which had been brought from Earth. It depicted liberty as a woman balancing the scales of justice. A window carved into the back wall displayed the infinite shifting starscape. Pierpoint inspected a chart marked for distribution to senior staff only. It showed the course suggested by the station's security computer for the days ahead. This would take them close to Planet 4 before veering off to the outer worlds. He took a fountain pen from a drawer in his desk and signed the approval. There was a knock at the door. "Come," he ordered. Margo entered the office. If anything, she looked even more efficient than Pierpoint. She was tall and dark-haired. Her hair was braided with silver beads, and she wore a long red coat and black trousers of the security division. A sparkling green sash tied about her waist indicated her rank as chief of security. Her face was stern and unattractive. She carried a bundle of papers bound with green string under one arm. "Sir," she began, "today's terminations. The notice requires the seal." She handed him the papers. He unpicked the green string with a custom ease and flicked through the papers.
Naomi Blakemore, Selden Ranch, and Jerrigan Volt. Yes, that all appears to be in order.
Volt was sentenced only this afternoon, sir,
Margo said with a hint of puzzlement.
I pronounced sentence myself. There's a problem?
It is irregular for termination to be scheduled so soon after sentence, sir, Margo pointed out.
There may be religious objections from 5.
There was a gap in the schedule, Pierpoint said smoothly. I ordered votes termination brought forward to fill the gap, and you know well that I have little time to spare for liberal opinion. The victims of crime have no time to reflect. You have an objection?
Margo smiled.
No, sir. I am impressed as ever by your devotion to the efficiency of the station.
Pierpoint took a large stamp from his desk, rolled it in an ink pad, and thumped it down over each name on the list. The stamp left the seal of the rock. He replaced the tape and handed the bundle back to her.
Thank you, Margo.
He picked up the course chart.
And these are the new course details, approved and signed.
She took them.
Very good, sir. And there's a Mr. Spigot waiting to see you in the lobby, sir.
Pierpoint frowned and looked up.
Spigot? I've never heard of the fellow. Has he an appointment?
No, sir,
said Margo.
He is an agent of 5 police.
Pierpoint sighed and slapped his palms on the desk. He was accustomed to police officers appearing unexpectedly, usually with a warrant to interview somebody in custody.
Tell him to wait. I'll send for him when I've finished with these reports.
Margo nodded and left the office. A few minutes later, the door of Pierpoint's office was thrown open and a man entered. He wore a fashionably cut black suit, a black sweater, and expensive black shoes with pointed heels. His long, dark hair flowed over his collar. His face was long, scarred, and stubbled with a prominent broken nose. He carried a thin plastic case. He extended a hand to Pierpoint.
Spigot, I'm with Capitol Police on 5.
He spoke with a broad North Nation accent. His manner was conspicuously informal. Pierpoint looked up from his work and tapped his pen on his blotter with irritation.
My chief of security instructed you to wait in the lobby, Mr. Spigot.
The doctor and Romana had emerged from the cave into a long metal corridor, at the end of which they found a door. The sonic screwdriver made short work of its electronic lock, and they walked through into a crowded concourse. The walls and floors appeared to be made of stone. People dressed in simple coveralls and tabards chattered in small groups. Some were seated on leather sofas and nibbled at bowls of nuts. Others sucked at frothing drinks through curled straws. The revelers' skins were pasty and pale. On the far side of the large room was a long bar. Ambient music was being piped through concealed speakers.
A recreational area,
surmised Romana. She wrinkled her nose.
Rather drab.
The doctor pushed through the crowd to the bar.
2 glasses of water, please,
he ordered. The barman nodded pleasantly and broke open 2 bottles of mineral water.
No till,
the doctor whispered to Romana as he took the drinks.
No point of exchange.
They made their way to a vacant couch.
Should that matter?
asked Romana as she brought her glass to her lips. The doctor stopped her.
Wait.
He sniffed suspiciously at his own drink and then looked around at the cheerful, chatting crowd.
How very odd. They haven't even noticed us. Don't touch the nibbles, Romana.
Romana dipped her finger in her water and dabbed it on her tongue.
A suppressant? Some sort of neural inhibitor?
The doctor nodded.
Has to be. The question is, who's doing the drugging?
And why?
He put his glass down.
We'll worry about why later. First things first, I'd still like to know where.
He stood and tapped one of the other drinkers on the shoulder.
Excuse me, yes, hello. I'm a stranger to these parts, and I was wondering if you could perhaps remind me of the name of the nearest star.
In a small, darkened room on a higher level, a range of monitor screens relayed images from cameras positioned at points around the complex. Deputy Security Officer Sham was on duty, eating a nutrition bar and reading a book screen. He was a young man, bright, alert, and destined for promotion. Only occasionally did he look up to check that all was proceeding smoothly, as always, within the Rock of Judgement. Something odd caught his eye in the refreshment zone. He put down his book and squinted at the screen. What he saw was impossible. He reached for a communicator button and opened a channel to his superior.
Ma'am,
he reported urgently,
there are 2 unauthorized personnel in the refreshment zone.
The voice of Margo asked.
Intruders?
Yes, ma'am. A man and a woman. They're talking to the admin staff. The man the doctor had chosen to talk to stared back at him with large, dulled eyes.
You don't belong, he said slowly. I don't recognize you.
He smiled at Romana.
Either of you.
The doctor shrugged.
Well, no. As I said, we're travelers.
The man shook his head and laughed. Don't be silly. There are no travelers here.
Really? Said the doctor. How unwelcoming.
The man smiled again and wandered off to join one of the small, chatting groups. That wasn't very productive, Romana observed as he rejoined her on the couch. If this is a relaxation center, what work do these people do? Could they be miners?
Oh, no. Look at their clothes. Their hands, their posture.
He broke off and stared more closely at the nearest group.
Yes, their posture. Slumped shoulders, crooked necks, knocked knees.
So they are miners.
Office workers, more like. The people have been sitting behind desks all day, in uncomfortable chairs. It's really very unhealthy.
He smiled at her.
Romana, do you realize that we're surrounded by doped civil servants?
Before she could reply, a gong sounded and the lights in the large room dimmed. The crowd quietened. The wall facing them slid open slowly with a low hum and two figures, a man and a woman, emerged. They wore blank red masks and skin-tight red leotards. The ambient music was replaced by a tribal drum beat. The two figures began to strike poses as the rhythm changed. The doctor grimaced.
This must be the turn. I don't like it.
Spigot ran a glance over the High Archon, whose duties also made him station administrator. The file on him back at HQ had got him right. He was a man accustomed to being bowed and scraped to. Called to the bar at 20, first briefly at 21, criminal barrister of repute for 20 years, confirmed as High Archon, aged 45. A man used to giving orders. Well, in Spigot's line of work, there was no time for that sort of thing. He treated everyone the same, beggar or minister, gave them the same chances, dealt to them from the same deck. That was how he got results. By breaking the rules. And damn it, that was how he'd lost Angie and the kids. Spigot settled himself in the chair opposite Pierpoint. This is a serious business, he said. Something big. See, there's something I need from you.
What exactly?
Probably doesn't like my accent, thought Spigot. Can't handle the idea of a lad from North Nation making it big. Your security computer net. I need to take a look at it. Pierpoint put his pen down and frowned.
For what purpose? We have a team of skilled technicians working on all our systems constantly.
Probably doesn't like my hair either, thought Spigot. Can't handle the idea of a lad with looks and long hair getting on in life. Afraid I can't dissolve my reasons, sir. I just need to inspect your security net. He leaned forward on the desk and scratched at his itching chin. Then I can be on my way and out of your life, yeah?
May I see your warrant?
Asked Pierpoint. Spigot took a slim, black, plastic wallet from an inside pocket and handed it across the desk. He watched as Pierpoint flipped it open and inspected it. The small photo inside was one of Spigot's favorites. It showed him with an expression that was both tough and wounded, displaying the qualities of strength and vulnerability, the unconventional good looks that had brought him results at work and in the bedroom. And damn it, those were the maverick qualities that had lost him Angie and the kids.
This does not allow access, Pierpoint said severely. Your rank is only grade 3. Without a special warrant, I cannot provide what you ask. I presume you have one?
Spigot sighed and took back his identification. Listen, mate, he said. You and I both know that rules are there to be twisted. I'm on the trail of something hot, something big. I need to get into that computer.
Pierpoint stood. Your suggestion is impertinent. Now, if you have nothing further to add, I must request that you depart and allow me to continue with my work.
The old guy was really rattled, thought Spigot, not used to having his authority challenged. Well, he had some surprises coming now that 5 police had sent their top investigator up to the Rock of Judgement. The doped workers clapped politely as their evening's entertainment came to a close. The red-garbed dancers bowed and returned through the wall, which closed up after them. The lights in the bar came up.
Well, that was interesting, the doctor said, in a tedious and incomprehensible sort of way.
Romana nodded. If what you've reasoned is correct, these people's lives must be exceptionally unfulfilling. This kind of recreation releases accumulated tensions in a controlled environment.
Yes, said the doctor. Doesn't stop it being boring, though.
He yawned.
The randomizer really does lack discretion. How about a trip to Transicaster?
What, next to the black hole of Dahara? Romana said doubtfully. The doctor stood up.
Well, it's got to be better than this. At least there you can get a decent drink.
He sat back down again, suddenly, and jammed his hat down on the tangle of thick, curly hair. Romana was alarmed. Doctor, what's the matter?
We've got company, he whispered. Over there.
Romana glimpsed men in red uniforms pushing through the crowd. Some of them were carrying blasters. The doctor took her hand.
Follow me. We'll go out the way we came in.
They attempted to tiptoe back towards the door, but as the doctor was 6'4" and was wearing a multicolored scarf that was 26 feet long, his attempts to appear inconspicuous failed. A voice cried, "There they are!" and the uniformed officers burst into the open. Their leader, a woman with stern and unattractive features, stepped forward. "You! Remain still!" The doctor indicated the door.
Yes, well, we were just going. Charming place you have here.
The woman raised her blaster and pointed it between his eyes.
"You are unauthorized personnel. I have the authority to shoot you if you do not comply with my instructions. Raise your hands."
Well, if you put it like that,
said the doctor. He and Romana raised their hands.
"You will follow me in single file and will not attempt to communicate with each other,"
the woman barked.
"Make an attempt to escape and you will be executed immediately."
She turned away. The doctor and Romana were hustled away through the crowd by her officers. As he passed the bar on the way out, the doctor called cheerfully,
"A pint of whatever that lady's been drinking, please."